The number 666 gets all the attention. In the original manuscripts, it's a footnote. The word Antichrist never appears in Revelation. It shows up only 4 times in the Bible, all in the letters of John, referring to multiple people, not one figure. Early church fathers couldn't agree on what it meant. Political enemies called each other Antichrist for centuries, and a lot of what gets taught today was assembled long after the ink dried. I'm going to share what the texts say versus what made it to the pulpit. Subscribe and keep an eye out for videos like this. Number 1. The word Antichrist appears exactly 4 times in the Bible. All 4 are in the letters of John, specifically 1 John 2:18, 1 John 2:22, 1 John 4:3, and 2 John 1:7. Not once in Revelation. The beast, the dragon, the false prophet, those are Revelation figures. But the original Greek text never calls them Antichrist. That connection came later, assembled by interpreters who stitched separate books together into one narrative. The actual letters of John talked about many antichrists, plural, people who had already come in the first century. John wrote that anyone who denied Christ was an antichrist. It was a category, not a prophecy about one future figure. Number 2. The Greek word antichristos is ambiguous. The prefix anti can mean opposed to or in place of. Early translators argued about which meaning applied. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 AD, saw the Antichrist as a future tyrant who would sit in the temple and claim to be God. Origen of Alexandria, a generation later, read much of it as allegory, a symbol for spiritual opposition rather than a literal person. Hippolytus of Rome wrote an entire treatise identifying the Antichrist with specific prophecies from Daniel. 3 church fathers, 3 different frameworks. The unified doctrine taught today was assembled centuries after they died. Number 3. The number 666 has a history most people don't hear about. In the book of Revelation, chapter 13, the number is called the number of a man. Early readers used gematria, a system where Hebrew and Greek letters had numerical values. When you spell Nero Caesar in Hebrew letters and add them up, you get 666. Some early manuscripts actually read 616, which matches a different spelling of Nero's name. A lot of scholars believe the original audience understood exactly who the beast was. It wasn't a future figure. It was the emperor who had already persecuted Christians and burned Rome. The prophecy was about first century politics, written in code so the Roman authorities wouldn't understand. Number 4. Once the Nero connection faded from memory, the Antichrist became a weapon. In medieval Europe, popes called emperors Antichrist when they challenged church authority. Emperor Frederick II was labeled the Beast by Pope Gregory IX in the 1200s. The favor was returned. Imperial writers accused the papacy itself of being the Antichrist system. When Martin Luther broke with Rome in 1517, he didn't soften the language. He declared the Pope to be the Antichrist in official Protestant confessions. John Calvin agreed. The accusation became standard Reformation theology, printed in pamphlets and preached from pulpits across Northern Europe. Number 5. The Catholic Church responded in kind. Counter-Reformation scholars developed a theory that the Antichrist was a future individual, not an institution. This pushed the prophecy back into the end times and took the heat off the papacy. A Jesuit priest named Francisco Ribera wrote a commentary in 1590 arguing exactly this. The Protestant version said Antichrist was already here, sitting in Rome. The Catholic version said he hadn't arrived yet. Both sides used the same texts. The difference was politics. Number 6. The pattern repeated with every major conflict. Napoleon was called the Antichrist by preachers on both sides of the Atlantic. Some rearranged the letters of his name to get 666. A century later, the same happened with Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. During the Cold War, American evangelicals identified the Soviet Union with the beast system. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the predictions shifted to the European Union, the United Nations, or whoever seemed threatening that decade. Every generation found a candidate. Every generation was certain. Number 7. What the early church fathers actually debated gets left out of most sermons. Origen suggested the Antichrist might be an internal spiritual state, not an external ruler. That view was later condemned as too allegorical. The church needed a literal enemy, something concrete to oppose. Councils in the 4th and 5th centuries standardized which interpretations were acceptable. Dissenting views were labeled heresy. The text survived, but the alternative readings were buried in archives. The version that won became the version everyone inherited. And that says a lot about how doctrine gets made. Number 8. The texts that didn't make the Bible told different stories. The Apocalypse of Peter, written around 135 AD, described the end times without any single Antichrist figure. The Ascension of Isaiah, another early Christian text, mentioned a deceiver called Beliar who would inhabit a murderous king. Different communities had different enemies and different expectations. When church councils in the 4th century finalized which books belonged in the canon, these alternative visions were excluded. The diversity got edited down to one approved version. Some of those rejected texts survived in monastery archives, copied by monks who didn't ask questions. Number 9. Some early Christian communities didn't expect an Antichrist at all. The Didache, a 1st century teaching manual, warned about false prophets and deceivers in general terms. No single figure, no beast, no number. Other traditions focused on internal spiritual corruption rather than an external enemy. When bishops gathered at councils to settle disputes, they chose interpretations that served institutional unity. A decentralized, spiritual reading didn't help build a church hierarchy. A concrete, future enemy did. The councils made choices, and those choices became doctrine. Number 10. The Apocalypse of Elijah, another excluded text, described a son of lawlessness who would perform miracles and deceive nations. But the details differed from what Revelation described. Early readers had multiple competing predictions to choose from. The selection process wasn't purely theological. It was also political. Texts that supported Roman Church authority tended to survive. Texts that challenged it or offered incompatible timelines were labeled dangerous. A lot of people today don't know these alternatives existed. Number 11. Modern biblical scholars have largely moved past the popular understanding. Academic journals and seminary textbooks explain the historical context, the Nero theory, the political uses of apocalyptic language. A survey found that over 40% of Americans believe in a literal Antichrist who will appear before the end times. Among biblical scholars with advanced degrees, the percentage holding that view is much lower. What gets taught in divinity schools doesn't always match what gets preached on Sunday morning. The gap exists, but rarely gets discussed publicly. Number 12. Pop culture filled the space that scholarship left empty. The Omen in 1976 gave the Antichrist a Hollywood face. The Left Behind novels sold over 80 million copies starting in the 1990s. These stories drew from a specific branch of Protestant prophecy belief called dispensationalism, developed in the 1800s, not from ancient manuscripts. The popular image, a single charismatic deceiver who rises to world power, owes more to fiction than to first century texts. But for a lot of people, the fiction became the framework. Number 13. The forbidden truth isn't actually forbidden. The academic consensus, the textual history, the political context, all of it sits in any university library. Commentaries from the 1800s document the Nero theory. Church history textbooks explain how councils selected canon and condemned heresy. The information isn't hidden behind locked doors. It's just not popular. It doesn't fit the narrative that fills auditoriums and sells books. Complexity doesn't preach as well as certainty, and certainty keeps the collection plates moving. Number 14. The irony is simple. The early church fathers who shaped Antichrist theology
disagreed with each other. The councils that standardized doctrine did so through votes and politics. The label was used for centuries to attack political enemies.
The texts people cite were written about first century Rome, not the distant future, and the version most people believe today was assembled long after the originals were written, shaped by interests that had nothing to do with prophecy. The documents are there, the footnotes are available. A lot of people just don't read them. And that says everything about who controls the story.